They had bought and sold 39,000 homes in 2022, 20,000 in 2023, and just 13,500 in 2024. And D.R. Horton and Lennar make up almost a quarter of the new home sales in and around the country of the public builders.
When we saw, through the great financial crisis, home pricing really start to drop off, it becomes kind of a negative downward spiral. What this Learn Your Way tool is designed to do is make it relevant to the student, whatever their individual needs are, and as well intended as most teachers and educators are.
Episode 59 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, we're getting pretty close to 60 here. I think that's over the hill. Good to be with you today.
Yeah, when you said we're getting pretty close to 60, I was thinking, crap, I'm not even 50 yet. I'm hoping that I'm not getting that close to 60. But 60 episodes in is going to be a fun milestone. Not always easy to make the time to sit down and do these, but always enjoyable. It's one of those things I never come away from saying, man, I regret having made the time to do it. It's just a little painful on the front end to set it aside.
Well, we often open the show talking about how interesting the times we live in and are recording this podcast in. And I don't remember a time since we started a little over a year ago where there's been more news in a week that's come out. My goodness, there's a lot happening. And it resembles a little bit when I attend these appraisal conferences and you start to hear people strategizing about the next cycle, positive cycle that's coming in the real estate market.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's fun to be involved with those conversations. I'm trying not to be overly skeptical, but we've seen multiple false starts, where you get a little bit of interest rate relief. You see, hey, that really pulls people off the sidelines, and then rates go back up and you're kind of back to this bouncing along the bottom type of volume that we see and that mortgage origination sees. So I'm hoping that we're moving into an era where it becomes better rates and higher volumes start to return, because as we've highlighted in multiple ways, volumes are at historic lows. I mean, there's certainly upside from where we are, but I worry a little bit about false hope, as oftentimes as we've seen these false starts.
Well, not even 2 minutes in, Jeff, I'm already slightly veering away from a very busy set of show notes for us here. But it's interesting, as we're getting ready to record this, I see a lot of folks, social media and whatnot, that follow housing pretty closely. And I think we got a report that I don't think we're reporting on today of some better than expected home sale numbers. And I think just as soon as that data has come out, or it's coming out in a time that is kind of past the little mini boomlet that you might have seen, right? Because rates went from 6.9 down to 6.13 out in front of the Federal Reserve's meetings last week. And we got a 25 basis point drop. I think some were kind of hoping that it would be a little larger of a drop, and maybe forecasting more drops than were said. So we have rates now at 6.35. So they've risen a bit here for us. And I think that's created a little bit of a lull. People jumped in real fast at that super low rate and are now maybe back into pause mode for a second.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it was interesting to see, some of the desired or stated desires, Trump, arguing for several percentage point cuts. I think I saw something from Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who was saying, hey, it could be at least 1 or 1.25% cut. None of that was really on the table by market expectations. But as things go from 6.13 back up to the 6.35, I mean, we really see that's very impactful on the amount of transactions that take place. So another small little bump. But I think the expectation is that longer term through the end of this year and into next, that rates will be working their way down. But I was commenting on a chat that we're in. It's going to be bumpy. It's going to be up and down. But hopefully, over that period of time, it's a tailwind that the market just hasn't seen for a while.
Yeah. General momentum is positive, Jeff. It is. There just still is so much uncertainty with what the market looks like over the next 12, 18 months. And certainly what it looks like over the next 1, 2, 3 months. That's just wildly up in the air. But with that momentum of optimism, we have some major news events. The two that I wanted to highlight first are the Open and Compass acquiring Anywhere, acquiring Compass, I think is the right way to say that. Let me make sure of that. Yeah, I think it is Compass acquiring Anywhere, despite the number of brokers shown on the screen here being a little larger for Anywhere. But these are two of the top four brokerage houses in the country with quite a bit of tech, quite a bit of initiative here. And so we've seen a big coming together there. So Jeff, I'll get your comments. The next one is some real movement with Opendoor, who has been kind of prominent and infamous in the iBuying space. I certainly see their signs all over town. So wanted to talk about both of those. Which one do you want to start with?
Yeah, you bet. Well, I think we can probably talk about the acquisition with Compass and Anywhere. And one of the things that stood out to me, Mark, on that was, one, it's a major consolidation of two large brokerage houses. With some of the headlines, that I was looking at, it helped me to put into context that these are underneath these sit brands like Century 21, Coldwell Bankers, Sotheby's, Better Homes, some of the brokerages that those living and breathing in real estate transactions every day probably recognize more readily than the brokerage house holding, company or name or whatever. But, it's always interesting to see when you have this level of consolidation among some of the biggest players out there. Do you have any read on what they're hoping to accomplish with this acquisition?
Well, much like Rocket, much like Zillow, everybody is trying to build as close to an end-to-end platform as they can in the real estate sales cycle as we're coming up on a more positive interest rate cycle. So I think it is that, I think this is really a play for Compass to be competing with Zillow. And the sales lead side of the business. It seems to be, I think combined, these folks will have some 340,000 agents. I know the note we have on the screen shows quite a bit more. So just a couple of different sources there. It's big, whatever it is. Combined value of 10 billion. There's a lot of software and tech plays from these groups here that I think combined are pretty synergistic. In one note, I think, is that rate or guaranteed rate, sixth largest lender in the country, has joint ventures with both of these entities. So kind of low key, big deal and big winner for those guys. They have a joint venture with Compass called Origin Point and guaranteed rate affinity with Anywhere. And, these are both coming together here, I think, is a really good play. And I don't know, a vertical stack coming together that's even beyond the headline of these two coming together.
You definitely are seeing that. Some of the biggest players trying to compete with each other or implement a strategy that will allow them to be, kind of emerge as the winner, in whatever it is they're chasing. So that explanation and description of the strategy definitely resonates, on this end. And we see that in other industries, other markets as well. In the appraisal space, you're seeing something of a consolidation around management companies being acquired, and I think trying to go after, kind of a similar dominant market, presence and ability to, to have as much share as possible as, through acquisitions. And I think that's what we're seeing play out here.
Jeff, I wanted to touch on that. Around this deal, around Rocket and Mr. Cooper, around Rocket and Redfin, and on and on. Consolidation is not just happening in real estate. It's happening everywhere. You've got the big winners that come through this, and it's happening in and around appraisal in our world. Certainly on the appraisal management company side, I think we had some efforts for consolidation in the appraisal space. 2020 and then during COVID, one way or another, that maybe aren't full steam ahead here, but at the same time that we talk about the number of appraisers likely reducing 15, 20, 30% with these new forms coming through, And we have the new forms creating a new way to work, separating the inspection to some degree, or the option of separating the inspection from the appraisal. There's just so much consolidation, I think, in some level, in the name of ultimate efficiency. The market is seeking efficiency and removing friction. And so that doesn't just happen in appraisal. This happens in every space. Speed, like getting access to what you want faster. I think all of this is in the name of that effort.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I've seen, and even in the appraisal space, we've seen some people pushing for, 24-hour appraisal, turn times or whatever, and a lot of pushback on that. But when you think about any technology that's really impacted the way that you live and work, it facilitates speed and convenience. Uber is just one single example, or ride sharing in general. It's been interesting to see how that trend has evolved from, only trusting taxis that are licensed and like there's a level of trust there, but you can call up an Uber on your phone. The trust issue, I think, has been resolved through the technology, but the speed and the convenience of that technology, just as an example, has had broad-based market acceptance. And I think that's where a lot of these plays are trying to go. Now, whether they're successful or not, obviously remains to be seen. But I think it's in that in that name of serving the market well and facilitating smoother, faster, cheaper transactions.
Yeah, this reminds me of a book that always really stuck in my mind called Blue Oceans. I probably referenced it early on in our podcast, but when you can add 10 times the value for 1/10 of the cost, that's when new worlds open up. And I think a lot of consolidation at times can bring enough synergies in place, maybe not to make 10 times the value at 1/10 the cost, but I think value often can mean speed alone there, and so when you can just make things faster and not cost any different or even cost less, it just becomes a total game changer and creates a new market. The analogy is that a blue ocean is just a brand new market that is created because of the value at a discounted price has been created here. So nobody knew they wanted it. They didn't want it, but it became possible. And then everybody wanted it.
Yeah, I think of Steve Jobs and Apple in really, doing an exceptional job there. Nobody knew that they wanted an iPod until the iPod was available, and you didn't have to carry this stupid Walkman, or like bigger, form factor device in your pocket or around. I didn't know I wanted a smartphone until it became available, and I have a computer in my pocket, and so all of those things, resonates for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think no transaction has taken place here, Jeff, but certainly in the name of disruption, blue oceans, in that there is a friction identified and a number of people going at it, is this Opendoor story. Opendoor was a SPAC, special purpose. I can't even remember now what this means, but essentially what people were doing, the thought was that it's very difficult to go public for private companies that have a exciting growth trajectory. It takes years to go public, a lot of money, that sort of thing. And so what investors were doing was creating this special purpose public vehicle out there, waiting to just wrap a private company into it. And so there was a wave of these. The guy that gets hammered for this, but you and I kind of respect anyway, Chamath Palihapitiya, was one of the central guys. The SPAC father maybe was called at some point, but this was one of his SPACs, and Opendoor is essentially an iBuyer out there. There's a lot that have come and gone. There are a lot that are still holding on, but there's been some news with them lately in a revitalization of at least the stock and the excitement for the strategy. And I thought this was an interesting story to follow, not just on this episode, Jeff, but moving forward, because you and I have particular insight into this transaction space and some of the important things for Opendoor and their ability to succeed one way or another. And so the story goes here that Keith Raboy and the former founder, his last name's Wu, maybe Keith or Kevin Wu, probably Kevin Wu, got together and said, hey, so the stock got up to like $34 a share during that COVID free money craze, and then has essentially been hovering at 54 cents a share for a year and a half, 2 years, and just sort of sputtering. They had bought and sold 39,000 homes in 2022, 20,000 in 2023, and just 13,500 in 2024. And so it's this, while the stock's going down, they've lost momentum, having a hard time buying. But opportunity was seen by this activist investor and the former founder, and they went out and kind of performed a bold CEO search. Ended up getting forgetting his name. I think I'll walk into it here pretty quickly. I just had it, but he was the COO at Shopify, and I think left $200 or $300 million on the table to come take this job. But it's all been sort of a social media storm, and the stock has soared from 50 something cents to $8.70 here this morning as we look at it. I bet you fact checked me a little bit here, Jeff. What did you find?
Well, I was either going to claim to just simply be smarter than you or quicker to search something, one way or the other. So yeah, I think the CEO or the new CEO of Opendoor, Kaz, I'm not sure how good I can say his last name, Najetin or something like that.
There you go. I think he goes by Kaz. So
I would too, since us American speakers aren't very good with last name, obviously. But anyway, really interesting. Also, searched SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company, which kind of makes sense in the context of the way that you described it. They go through the effort of getting out there in the public space and then acquire something like an Opendoor to avoid some of the friction and cost of going through a traditional IPO, process. But with that said, this Opendoor thing, and I remember we touched on this in the podcast, early on. One of the things that's really interesting is I think this vision of removing a lot of the friction, both in terms of the timing that it takes to sell residential real estate and the cost involved with selling it. You got to work with agents and commissions. You got to prepare and list and show and it's just a cumbersome process. You talk about a quick closing of a residential property being, fastest scenario is weeks and can take up to a month or longer if you've got buyers that have to work out financing and just all sorts of due diligence deadlines and disclosures and all of those sorts of things that just take time. I think as I read it, what Opendoor is striving to facilitate here is a much faster and more seamless transaction and just experience in purchasing or particularly in selling, residential real estate. So it's an interesting market or an interesting solution that they're striving to bring to market. I think as I'm hearing you articulate the decreasing number of transactions from 2022, 23, and 4, those were really hard times to be buying and homes and then making money on them once interest rates go up in 23 and the market really, starts to slow down. But it's an interesting approach, I think, that they have of solving for these friction points, in the process. To me, one of the things I think that would make a lot of sense, I think that what they've been doing is, trying to buy homes on a retail basis from just individual sellers. What would make a lot more sense with their buying power would be to partner with institutional sellers, whether it's large scale investors, those that acquire homes back through foreclosure, as a result of financing deficiencies and that sort of thing, would be kind of the scalable approach. I think you were seeing some stuff that they were, I don't know if pivoting fully, but scaling back some of the iBuyer approach in favor of, some other business model enhancements to improve their sustainability.
Yeah, I think the iBuying business. So first, there clearly is friction and an opportunity to add convenience to buying and selling homes. It is a lot to do. You list your home, you have 30 people come in and out of the house. You kind of you live in it, but you can't live in it. You can't buy the next one until you sell this one, unless you've got kind of a creative solution. And so these things can get pretty difficult. So there clearly is the opportunity. We saw the Zillow iBuying was kind of their biggest initiative for a long time there, and I think is fully shut down at this point. in its poor buying practices a lot, Jeff, I think. And it's, you're running a company that is got to show growth, right? That's what you need to do for investors. So you got to buy more properties. And if there aren't a lot of properties to buy, or you just need to buy a lot of them, you're not going to get a lot of discounts. You're not discount shopping. You're trying to get a lot through and run on really low margins. Well, when you run on low margin, at first, you're buying homes. So it's an enormous amount of cash that you've got to use to buy and sell these properties. And so, it's just expensive to have the cash and be moving these properties in and out. And if you either end up holding on to the property longer because you overestimated the sale price or the days on market necessary to sell that home, or you just couldn't sell it for what you thought you could and overbought. These things, there's no margin to give. So you've got to be really, really good at this. And, as the appraiser out there, it's like, man, I think you ought to take a little more care in the acquisition prices and knowing really what you're buying there and what it would be worth once fixed up. Because they all advertise instant acquisition because they have the algorithm that will put the exact value on the property. And that just, the data isn't good enough today to do that. It just isn't. And but I don't think that fits the tech venture capital narrative.
I think that's right. Although Zillow can affirm that they lost money doing that very same thing, and it's just not an easy problem to solve. But if it were, it wouldn't be this blue ocean kind of opportunity that you have described. It being. So I really do see as much friction as there is in the transaction process. I see a solution that can come forward. The thing I wonder with Opendoor is, are they going to be that solution, that institutional buyer with it, really makes selling a home much more liquid than it is in the moment? Or are they ahead of their time, or does somebody else come in with a more efficient model? I mean, those things I don't know, and kind of are an open question in my mind. I think about those that weren't the first to market, but that ended up ultimately capturing the market. Facebook in the social media space, there was whatever they were, MySpace and others that just didn't end up getting the momentum, and probably solving the problem as efficiently as Facebook and then others have gone on to do. And so, is Opendoor an early predecessor to what ultimately will be the kind of company that adds liquidity into selling my home, or is it going to be somebody else that comes along? I don't know. It really seems that for a lot of potential sellers, eliminating or at least reducing significantly those friction points makes a lot of sense, especially in this blue ocean theory. If it doesn't cost a lot more to do it, or can even net you as much or potentially more, if you're not factoring in commissions and stuff that might be required in a traditional transaction.
Jeff, it's going to be a lot of fun, I think, to watch. And it does seem to be this market opportunity. Who knows if it can be seized or who will do it. But I have a lot of fun watching even Kaz get really excited here about the opportunities in front of him. And he's ignited excitement, people at the company, these investors and all. And I'm cheering that on because I certainly relate to how difficult survival has been in the real estate space, no matter what segment you're in over the last 2 years. And to maybe get close to the light at the end of the tunnel and create some excitement on direction is really cool. One of the, God knows, Jeff, if this can actually make money or whatever, but it's a fun headline to think about is some 30-day money back guarantee on the purchase of your house is what he's had put out there. And, it's just adding all of the market functionality of a piece of clothing that you buy at, the Gap or something, but it's this huge piece of real estate. It's fun to think about, and it'll be fun to think about what sort of ideas they come up with and follow along.
Yeah, it definitely will. I have landed on this kind of dichotomy of comparisons. You've got, I remember when you reaching out making fun of me because Trevor Milton happened to be from my backyard, but you've got the Trevor Milton who kind of spearheaded the Nikola electric truck thing that ended up going bust, and a lot of it was just built on deceit and not actually having what was being billed as had. Versus the Elon, who's actually tackled the electric vehicle issue in a way that's proving to be scalable and effective and all of that. And so maybe we'll have to come up with a Milton or Musk like stamp on some of these things as to whether they are just a bunch of hot air that don't actually prove out, or they're the real deal that become the market solution that others then try to follow and keep up with and emulate or whatever. I'm not calling Opendoor yet. I don't know which it's going to be, but I do see a need for some disruption. And maybe they're the Milton, maybe they're the Musk. I don't know, but time will tell.
Boy, I'll tell you what, you listen to the people excited about it. They think there's a 100 bagger here in the stock. Eventually, they think there's a big opportunity. I am certainly not ready to say that, and would more likely lean to that won't happen at all. I think in this moment, but I'm rooting for them to find a path one way or another. Jeff, I want Trevor Milton's image consultant. My gosh, I think. Followed him pretty closely because I follow Tesla. I think I say that once an episode. I follow Tesla pretty closely, and the biggest shyster. My gosh, I mean, just so much lying. It's Elizabeth Holmes level, and somehow he's gotten pardoned by Trump. That just the most ridiculous decision in my mind, and somehow has come out saying he's the freaking victim in all of this, even though he lied to invest. I don't know. It's impressive.
Impressive it is, and maybe if there's split personalities, he's a victim of his other personality. I don't know, but it's that part made no sense at all to me either. I'll put my pay grade, I guess.
Well, Jeff, I don't know where to go next. I guess we can start here with a bunch of mortgage news. First of all, is Fannie predicting rates. There's been a little bit of a change one way or another. What do you see from it?
Yeah, so they had updated their predictions as far as where interest rates were going to land, projecting downward, which isn't a surprise. And we touched on this a little bit of kind of what we hope to be the tailwind that everybody in real estate has been hoping for a while of interest rates landing lower than where they have been. The article that I saw, and calls into question a little bit, although we're maybe not far off, was that Fannie had updated their rate projections to be at 6.4% at the end of 2025 and down just under 6% to 5.9% in 2026. I think that was by the end of the year. We've seen rates, get down in that range at the 6.13 as we commented on, and now back up close to this 6.35, which is very close to where Fannie's predicting them to end 2025. So if they're right, we're not going to be a lot different at the end of the year than we, as we sit at recording today. I'm hopeful that they may be, closer to 6 than 6.4. But the notable thing there is that those were downward revisions from what they were projecting previously, and with some additional anticipated Fed rate cuts, I think the market is generally anticipating that rates will get better. Just a matter of over what time period.
Jeff, I think these rate predictions from Fannie are probably pretty modest, knowing who's pulling the strings over the next 3 years. We've got Powell's term ending sometime in, I think, second quarter of next year, 2026. And we have the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, with words, we are going into an easing cycle, and we'll see massive decrease in mortgage rates, 100 to 150 basis points are the cuts Bessent was suggesting, not the 75. So doubling of what Powell had suggested, and saying, look, we're interviewing the next chairs. We're gonna, that is a criteria with which we are going to be interviewing, I think. So, I think we are going to see some good rate environments for us. We certainly have earned it through the pain over the last couple of years.
I sure hope we have, because there has been the pain to follow, no doubt. So, that's a good point. I look forward to updating or reviewing our predictions, that you and I had cast about middle of this year. I think one of those is if Jerome Powell will even still be the Fed chair by the end of the year or not. They're starting the process of, seeking his replacement, and whether that's, inserted or he just self-selects out before his term expires next year, we'll see. One of the friendly wagers, I guess, that we have as to, how and when that plays out. But definitely pressure from the administration to try to influence and lower rates. And that's got some concern, about, what is that appropriate or not? Does that call into question the independence and the financial stability of the Fed and, and the banking industry as a whole? I think just things that are worth observing or continuing to monitor. But certainly there is a push from that side for a lower interest rate than what Fannie is projecting through next year.
Well, continues to be interesting to watch and has direct impact on us and a lot of our viewers live. So we will be watching very closely. Next, Jeff, is the FHFA director, Bill Pulte, wearing a little thin, I think, folks out there. He has taken the tact of being extremely vocal, walking lockstep with President Trump, and maybe even getting out in front of what he thinks Trump would be saying or doing, kind of as I read it. It's really bombastic one way or another. So I think he's wearing a little thin there. But he is at the head of this conversation revolving around exiting conservatorship and privatizing Fannie and Freddie, with this kind of headliner of combining the two one way or another, with this kind of cryptic meme from Trump several months ago and all of that. There's been a little bit of talk about that. What do you see there?
Yeah, there has. I saw an article that was talking in part about what you let out with him rubbing some, especially in the House, kind of the wrong way, or tired of the just loud statements and kind of attacking rhetoric that he's used. But I think that the bigger point was the House Republicans are saying, hey, we're okay with some sort of an exit of Fannie and Freddie from conservatorship, but that's got to go through the House, not through the just at the will of the administration. And so, in fact, I found a quote that I think may just be worth referencing. Said the House Financial Services Republican said that Pulte's view of how quickly the administration should move to take public government-sponsored enterprises is not where the committee is, meaning the committee's thinking that it's going to take a longer time frame than what Pulte and even Trump are suggesting. They went on to say, we want to take a much more deliberate look at Fannie and Freddie. Yeah, and then they added they want to make sure that any action on the GSEs goes through Congress, which is probably the appropriate way to handle it. But Trump and Pulte have been very vocal about their exit from conservatorship and timing. And, we've both talked about consolidation of those two is not probably the best way to do it, at least from our perspective. Now, we're not the ones calling the shots, obviously, but there's some concerns at that level. So, the commentary coming out of that, even from the House Republicans, makes sense to me that it ought to be deliberate and something other than just a headline grabbing action that may in the long run be more detrimental to the housing liquidity and financial market than what I think they're maybe expecting that it could be.
Yeah, a long ways to go there. Definitely feels like more competitors in the space, not less, is the best thing for consumers. Probably pretty clunky though, Jeff, and in opposition of the consolidation trends we see and spoke about at the beginning of the show here. So we will follow along very closely. The stock doesn't dislike the conversations that are happening. I mean, it's almost like privatization is a foregone conclusion. It's really people arguing about how it's going to happen one way or another. So I think that's good for the stock price for sure.
That's how I read the move in the stock price is a vote of confidence that it is going to happen. It's just a matter of tactically how.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Jeff, I think we could fire through this mortgage refinance index. I think we talked about this a little bit at the outset, sharing that slide. But we're going through, I think, what Resi Club founder Lance Lambert, great content. Look at it a lot. You guys should check it out for sure. But had called, we're going through kind of a mini refi boomlet. And I think that's true when these rates drop the way they do. I think it's a lot of people that have gotten into mortgages over the last couple of years, at rates above 6.13, wherever they were at. And, a lot of times people are getting into those on some sort of an adjustable rate mortgage or some temporary thing that requires making more permanent the rates that are there. And so I think when you get rate drops like this, you got a lot of people that are acting, and we've seen a little bit of that. We talked about it at the beginning of the show. I think that slowed down even at 6.35, and maybe not because 6.35 is not workable for them. It's just they think they'll be lower at some point. So why refinance now, or why make the purchase now if the rates are going to be a little bit lower not long from now? So that uncertainty, I think, is there kicking up a lot of trouble. Next, just this slide with builders. I thought it was notable. This from John Burns, Research and Consulting, but that D.R. Horton and Lennar make up almost a quarter of the new home sales in and around the country of the public builders. They're just enormous. And, when they move, markets react one way or another. And on Lennar's earnings call over the last week, they told their investors that it is time to pause. They had been prioritizing sales and pace of sales over margins, Jeff. And we talked about that. There's huge concessions, the average sale price coming down, buying down rates more and more and more, often not putting certain upgrades in a home, but instead using that money to deal with the monthly cost. But I think as it's time to slow down in their minds and pull back a bit. So I think we're going to see a little bit less building, and I think that's going to be felt in a lot of places around the country.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I don't know in the short term that that's necessarily a bad thing. Long term, you've got to have the supplies, matching what the demand is in terms of just population growth and need for housing. It tends to be a bumpy ride and not a particularly smooth one, and in trying to, strike that balance. Coupling this story with something else that we saw from Lance Lambert, it really makes sense to me. I'm seeing some headlines around lumber costs coming down dramatically. I think to the extent that there's a pullback of building, if it softens costs to build, that probably helps, is not a bad thing. One of the things that Lance had identified in a separate X post was that in order to get back to pre-pandemic affordability in housing, one of three things would have to happen. Now, spoiler alert, I suspect it's probably a combination of these three, and it's not any one of them, but the level to which housing affordability has kind of gotten out of control is really highlighted by these numbers. He said, in order for us to get back to pre-pandemic affordability levels, U.S. incomes would have to spike by 60%. I'd love to say I thought that my income going up 60% in the near term was a likely outcome, and I don't think that it is. Home pricing would have to fall by 38% from where it is. And when we saw through the great financial crisis, home pricing really start to drop off, it becomes kind of a negative downward spiral. That's possible, but I don't think that's super likely, just given the housing inventory that's out there right now, especially if builders pull back. I don't think that home pricing is going to fall off a cliff. But the third option is for mortgage rates to fall by just over 4%, from 6.5% to 2.23% was the calculation. We're talking about interest rates, ending this year in the mid sixes, next year just under 6 as Fannie's projection. They may go down even more. I suspect it'll be a combination of these things that in the long term addresses the affordability issue that we have in housing right now. But it's just a stark reminder of the affordability challenge that we have and how much any one of those three legs of the stool would have to give to get us back to where we were just in 2019.
Boy, it is. It's pretty shocking that any one of those things would need such drastic change. It really is, Jeff. It's sort of like, it makes you take a step back and just think about how far things have gotten out of control. And I think, with the builders beginning to slow down a little bit, I'm not sure that would affect overall transaction volume. These guys have been sucking the oxygen out of the room of all existing home sales folks. We've heard it. We spoke about it from real estate agents. not long ago. It's like, man, when you got all these great rates and all these incentives at the new builder and you get a new home, nobody wants to buy a used home. And so I think if they do slow down, it will allow some of the used inventory to move in a way that it hasn't been able to.
I think that's exactly right. And ultimately, I think you're going to have a combination of those things play out to address the affordability issue. I remember the time that we lived through with values going down, and we look at it in the historical context, and it feels like it happened overnight, and it was a several year process before the market found the bottom and then gradually started coming back up. I think similarly, it's going to take some time for, with a combination of incomes rising, costs coming down, interest rates getting better, before you get to a more affordable place. And that assumes that you do. I mean, I hope that the long-term outlook isn't just that housing is less affordable for people. I don't think that's in anybody's best interest. But the market does have a way of course correcting. It just seems to take longer than you'd like when you're feeling that acute pain point of myself or my children aren't able to buy a home in the current environment because of the affordability challenges.
Well, shifting gears, Jeff, is a topic that I think is at least a little bit hobby interest to us. And it's the artificial intelligence, certainly, but the way that it may be changing education. Of all the things that are out there, education seems like the thing most ripe for disruption from artificial intelligence the soonest. And, on a college campus tour with my daughter, and just striking me how unprepared they have answers for. And I kind of think there's like a blind eye towards artificial intelligence and how disruptive it can be for this enormous industry that is secondary education. It really feels like it's coming. And this industrialized education, I think there's just a lot better way to do it and individualize it. And here this week, we have Google releasing a new AI product called Learn Your Way. And if anybody listening has used a large language model like ChatGPT and said, hey, teach me this subject like I'm in fourth grade or like I'm 10 years old or whatever, it will craft or dumb down or complicate the message just depending on your aptitude or stated aptitude one way or another. And Google is thinking about that and trying to build some applications that function the same way and really kind of maybe take on the textbook in a way that this static idea of like you're just going to read this boring textbook that everyone is going to read, nothing tailored to you one way or another. And so the concept generally is that that Learn Your Way will take topics, curate it towards your age, but also curate the stories and examples towards topics that you're really interested in. So, and they found a really improved digestion of the lessons that were being taught through tests and that sort of thing. And it just makes all the sense in the world to me for that sort of thing to happen. So I wanted to introduce that topic here, Jeff. Any initial thoughts about it?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And as you're describing it, Mark, the thought comes to my mind that it's kind of what you would want if you were going to hire a personal tutor for your student to customize the education. They know the student. They're going to teach them in ways and using analogies that resonate with them. And in this article that you shared with me, it talked about, if the kid's into basketball, it can use a basketball analogy for teaching principles of physics or whatever. Same if they're into art or whatever. But this is really what the promise of technology in general, but artificial intelligence in particular, is being billed as, is this way to customize the experience that we have to, I would hope, drive down the cost of the education, which has been a problem unto itself. But if there's not the expense of producing and then charging $1 million, it feels like, for just the textbooks in addition to tuition and everything else, if you can get a better, more customized curriculum and learning experience with less cost and better outcomes, that's that blue ocean we were talking about. And so the promise is very encouraging. I hope that it can play out in practice, but I sure don't see why it couldn't.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about this, I think, is, if we've even talked a long time ago about Google Notebook, which is like load a bunch of material up and they will give back to you in podcast format two LLMs having a conversation in a podcast about the topics you put up there. So if you're driving in the car and want to listen about, the Houston Texans' third loss of the year and what happened with it or whatever, you can load up a bunch of information and hear them talk about it. And but so that's there. But you've got the language models that you can ask to teach you in certain ways. But it's complicated for the novice to get through. And so these are apps that are more narrow in their broad capabilities, but very specific to certain use cases and make it kind of easy to use. And so in this case, it's like it's going to build audio lessons as part of what it's doing. It's going to build visuals that go along. And then it's going to have paragraphs and quizzes and all sorts of things there. What a learning tool. And feels like it could be pretty easy to use right away.
Boy, absolutely. And you found a few slides that kind of highlighted, or at least quantified some of the improvements. An immediate assessment across performance across digital learning tools. The Learn Your Way scoring 77% versus a digital reader at 68%. You would just expect that when the experience is customized, you're going to have a better experience. You're going to learn more and be more engaged with the material. And so I'm pretty optimistic about what this could be for the future of education, assuming that there's enough adoption that it actually makes it, at the end of the day, to the students.
You bet. Yeah. I mean, I've got a 9-year-old who's obsessed with sports, and if the example is little Susie has 3 jelly beans and this sort of thing happens, it's immediate checkout. But if we talk about why the basketball is dribbling and bouncing back off the floor, according to Isaac's third law, Newton third law, my goodness, yeah. And so these are just a couple of examples for those watching on YouTube of how they can present the topics and really combine them for you one way or another. There are photographs, cartoon sort of things that are showing. They've got audio lessons that you can listen to and all that sort of stuff. It's just amazing.
It really is. And, I've always heard forever in education that some people are more visual learners. Some are more learn better through reading and studying. Some learn better through, hearing and talking it out and that sort of thing. And what this is illustrating is you can integrate all of those approaches, but you can emphasize the ones that work best for the given student, and what they need. So, it's a lot of fun to see, kind of how they're identifying a concept of, we can teach whatever it is, math, physics, language arts, et cetera, in a very customized way. And my kids are the same way, Mark. You talk to them in the context of certain activities or events they care about, they're just naturally going to engage. You talk to them in the standard one-size-fits-all approach. Both of my girls complain about science. Science is stupid. It's boring. I don't like it. Well, there's a way to approach it that's very engaging for them, but it has to be customized to them. And I think that's what this Learn Your Way tool is designed to do, is make it relevant to the student, whatever their individual needs are. And as well intended as most teachers and educators are, it's not practical to do that in a class of 30 plus, students trying to teach the same material in a finite amount of time to do it. And so, exciting to see these kinds of tools emerging that I hope will, lead to an improvement in the overall educational experience.
I don't know. The whole thing is fascinating to me, Jeff. In having kids at this age it just makes me think, my kids are going to school for 8 hours a day, probably learning for no more than 2. They get a lot of fun recess, which is great, but they also get a lot of this like tamp down your energy time that they've just kind of got to get in line and behave and that sort of thing. And I think they could be at home learning in probably an hour and a half or 2 a day and be way ahead of what they're getting even at a good school, and leaving time for all the heavy sports stuff that in practice that is necessary to compete these days, and then have time to be a kid in the evening or family time. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll ever pull the trigger on that, but I think about it a lot. It seems more possible today than it ever has.
Well, you are sounding like a homeschooler, but I don't have any shade to throw there, because there's just a good approach for everybody. But these tools sure make, whether it's true homeschooling or whether it's integrated into the public or school system or a hybrid approach, that combines some of both. I think you get a lot of the good socialization that you need in the sporting and athletics, for kids that are pursuing that. Not every kid does. And so, providing other environments where kids are able to socialize and interact. I've got a daughter who's doing orchestra and band and really enjoys, doing that aspect of it. That's an important part of development and growing as well. But you want the educational time to be as, educational dense and as effective as possible. And I think that these can really help, at a minimum be a boon, or could really be, a solution for those that, maybe say, hey, there's something better than public school for my kid.
I'd love to see the colleges that are ahead of the curve here in forcing integration of AI, not kind of running from it, which I see a lot of. So it'll be interesting to watch. And certainly appraisers are lifetime learners. I think that is a lot of how you get into this and why it appeals to you. And I think as learning is changing and becoming more accessible, I think these topics can be pretty interesting to the folks that watch this. So, Jeff, that'll do it for episode 59. Enjoyed it here. A lot going on. Look forward to diving deeper into some of these topics.
Really appreciate it, Mark. Look forward to hearing your summary of your Texans being not doing so well. I mean, I don't know why you would cue AI up to rub that salt in that wound, but best of luck to them and beyond. But always a fun conversation. Really appreciate it, man.
A Houston sports fan, man. The Astros blowing it. The Texans terrible. We've been fortunate for a while, but this is reminding me of the 90s and early 2000s.
The luck has run out, although I can at least have AI generate a podcast trashing on them to send to you to
thank you. Appreciate
to
that.
harass you in addition. But
Well,
right. Hopefully their fortunes turn. But fun conversation as always, man.
All right. Take care.